So what this is going to cover, make sure I get that right. Yep, there we go. So what we're going to cover is I'll go over descriptions of some of these tools. I'll go over some use cases for each of them. And then we'll talk resources at the end. But what we're not going to do is I'm not going to show you each tool or go over the how-to content for that. Each one of these would require an equal length kind of session to talk about. And by no means when I say that, does that mean that your students would not be able to pick these tools up? Everything here is stuff that I am confident that your students would be able to learn if they don't already know how to learn from their previous experiences in other courses or in high school. We're also not going to cover any common technical issues with any of these because that's what we're here for off these workshops. So you can contact us or Bluecore or 4Help to help with those type of technology issues. I'll also talk about some feature overlap and integrations when they come up, because there's some very powerful ones that can be utilized if you're in that zone of production. For a lot of these, you'll probably only use one tool or something like that. So let's start with the print, graphic design, image manipulation kind of tools first, right? You've probably heard of most of these. So obviously Photoshop is the big one. So it's a photo editing software. You could essentially use it for students stitching images together to alter photographs that they've taken, creating like a digital postcard, maybe doing things like making flyers with it. It is a very complicated tool, but it's a very powerful tool. There's a lot of a lot of depth to a lot of what you can do with it. But on a very surface level, you can learn how to use it fairly quickly to do very basic things. So if they're creating a larger piece where they need to, say, crop photos to a certain size, Photoshop might be the tool for that. There might be some other tools later that we'll talk about that might be a better use case than that, but Photoshop is very good at what it does. If it's something that you want to add to a course, I would really suggest scaffolding it through a couple of different assignments to lead up to it, if it is the main purpose of or the main tool that they're going to use. And that's true of almost all the ones we're going to talk about. Is scaffolding is going to be important to kind of build student skills as they use these tools. So Photoshop Express is essentially Photoshop on mobile devices. And this is what I was referring to when I said, well, maybe another tool will be more useful. So if they're taking pictures with their phone, they can put it through Photoshop Express and do a lot of the work that they would be doing in the Photoshop program in Express. So, this would be something like if you're doing like low stakes kind of projects using images, you want them to create propaganda posters, or like you want them to create memes or things like that based off of images they find online or photographs that they take with their phone. This is a real easy way for them to do that. There's also Photoshop Camera, Fix, and Mix. These are 3 separate programs, and they're essentially photo editing apps. So why you would use this over Photoshop Express is that if you're having them do things like photo essays, right? If you have them making collections of photos, these have real specific photography focused tools that are less about making like permanent alters to the image like in Photoshop and in Photoshop Express, and more of like adjustments to the photo. You could do those adjustments in Photoshop. It's just a lot less complicated in these apps. So if you're doing something like where they're using their phones to create collages of images, or if they're creating like a story from a collection of images, this would be a good option for them to do some very basic editing. And with all the Adobe products, I forgot to mention, these are all available for every student, staff, and faculty here at the university through their U of M login. So there's also Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, and Lightroom Mobile. So these are essentially like fix and mix and cut, but it's all in one program, and there's additional extra stuff added in. If they're editing a large number of photos, like if they're taking a lot of photos at an event and then kind of picking which ones they want to do and then making some alterations, but they want to make the same alterations to all the photographs, this is the program to use, because you can essentially, if you're using the same camera for an event film and you shoot 100 pictures during that event to create, 4 or 5 images, you can take those 4 or 5 images and use the same applications on those 5. And the way that Lightroom kind of manages large amounts of photographs is different from the other programs. Photoshop tends to focus on the one image you have open, or the 1 or 2 images you have open, while Lightroom is very much about managing libraries of images. If you have any kind of interest in students analyzing metadata of images, this is also the program to use as well, because it has all the metadata readily available to be able to sort, search, and utilize. Moving more towards the creative side of things, Adobe Illustrator is interesting. It is a heavy lift kind of program. It would take the majority, if you wanted students to use this, you would have to have a very specific case for using it, because it is a very difficult program to learn. But this is a really ideal for creating like posters, infographics, diagrams, things of that nature, because it uses a lot of vector graphics, right? So the whole thing is almost built on vector graphics, right? And so like curves and lines and things of that nature, it is something that they should probably work up to, right? To more complex things with it. We've had instructors do things like having people create comic books using Illustrator, or children's books using it. So it's definitely accessible for students to use. It just takes some effort for them to learn it, because it is a complex program. But once they have it down, it's great. And there's a lot of really great generative AI tools that Adobe has put into Illustrator over the last few years, that have really made it a very capable, sorry about that, hold on, very capable of I'm sorry, it's just very capable of creating high quality images and very precise images from scratch, as opposed to making things that are more composited in Adobe Photoshop. The other one I'll mention is Fresco. So Fresco is a digital art application. It's something essentially that you draw with. It's a painting tool. So if you have a project where you want students to use drawing as a method of expression, or as a method of creating things, Fresco might be an option, especially if they're using tablets. It's available on phones as well, but tablets is really where this program shines. And it's really great at freeform compositing. So if they're doing things where they don't have where they want to just draw stuff and then like have another element that they're also drawing, it's a lot better to do it there than in Photoshop. Photoshop is very requires a lot more skill to handle that than Fresco does. But you definitely need some kind of like drawable surface or a tablet to really make this shine. On the more precise method, there's also InDesign and InCopy, which is professional publishing software. So if you want to have them work on like layouts, like figure out magazine layouts or newspaper layouts, InDesign is a way for them to work on that. InCopy is essentially a collaborative version of InDesign. And so if they're making a zine, for example, you want the groups to make zines. This could be a good tool for them to use. Again, it's something that they would have to dedicate time to learn. But once they did, and I'm talking maybe like, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours of actually sitting down with the program and using it before they could probably create something that would be usable for a project. So with a lot of these, you kind of have to build it into the course and scaffold it so that no one is being kind of overwhelmed here. So other kind of print things to think about. I know it's kind of basic, but WordPress. So for people to create like blogging sites, there's a lot of kind of creativity in the design of that, right? And there's templates and things like that they can adjust. Also a program called Story Maps, which allows them to use ArcGIS to create location specific kind of stories. And that's something that I think is, again, something that needs to kind of work. They need to learn how to use the program and takes a lot of effort to get them to the point where they're creating something. So it would be a semester-long project to use something like Story Maps. Moving on to the video production and audio production side of things, the main piece of software that I want to impart upon you that I think it's an accessible piece of software for video production work and audio production work is Adobe Premiere Rush. It's available on PC, Mac, and mobile devices. And it's a video editing software, but you could also edit audio through it. And it's essentially way less complicated than Adobe Premiere. And previously we had said, oh, you should use iMovie, right? Apple's iMovie. But the problem with iMovie is that it's only available to people who have Mac computers, and our survey shows that not everyone has Mac computers. And Adobe Premiere Rush is available on all computers and all mobile devices, both on campus and on people's personal devices. It's easy to collaborate with. There's fewer options and effects than Adobe Premiere Pro. And so it kind of like is in the middle of like the really easy, but feature light, something like iMovie, and something that is very difficult for students to pick up on, like Premiere. It is our kind of recommendation that if you're doing something where the video editing or audio production is secondary to the goals of the assignment, but the primary goal is for them to demonstrate, mastery of the content, and not mastery of the production abilities, right? Premiere Rush is your program. That is definitely the best option when it comes to creating those type of assignments. But that said, Adobe Premiere Pro is still useful. If you're having them, if students are focused a lot on editing, like if they are doing things that are complicated in adding effects, or they're taking multiple streams of video and mixing them together, like a lot of clips, right? Or they're doing things where they're it's just like complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of clips, there's a lot of audio segments, things like that. You may want to have them actually use Premiere Pro. It is a little bit harder to use, although that's really not that much of a lift. When I say like harder to use, I'm saying like I could teach somebody how to use Premiere Rush in less than a half an hour. It would take a half an hour to an hour to really get them to be at the same confidence level with Premiere. It's not that much more complicated, it just has a lot more options, and it has a lot more granularity in the options. So Premiere Rush kind of allows you to, it essentially gives you guardrails, right? So students don't get lost into the weeds of all the features. But if you want them to kind of figure it out and go deep, then Premiere Pro is the way to go. The other thing I'll say about Premiere Pro is that Premiere Pro has like round trip kind of integrations with some other programs. So if you're having them do audio fixing on their audio with Adobe Audition, which we'll get to in a second, then you'll want them to use Premiere Pro, because then they could round trip or like, send the audio files to Audition, fix them, and then send them directly back into the same project inside of Premiere Pro. But for most projects, I would say like 9 out of 10 projects, Premiere Rush is the option. I just mentioned Audition. It's an audio production and editing suite. It is fairly complicated in terms of if you're not used to using any kind of like audio editing software, or if you've never used something like Audacity or GarageBand even, getting your head around how it works is complicated. But it is pretty stellar at fixing audio problems. And so if that is a thing, like you want the students to produce projects that will be distributed publicly, that will have high production value, things like that, this might be the option for you for podcasting. The issue with this is that it is way more complicated to edit a podcast in Audition than it is in Premiere Rush. In Premiere Rush, you just drop the file in and you can kind of like move clips around kind of like a jigsaw, right? On a timeline. In in Audition, it is way more complicated. This is all I'll say. It works on a completely different kind of paradigm of editing than Rush does. But if you have a lot of like if they're creating music or soundscapes or things of that nature, then maybe Audition would be the option. Another one I'll mention here, which is kind of an oddity, and this is really, if you have a specific use case for it, would be the way to do it. Like if you wanted to explore animated characters or performance, character animator might be a good option. So what it does is it's a motion capture software. So you either plug in data or you record data of performance, like me moving my hands, things of that nature. And then it maps it to an animated character that you can put into it. And so if you want people to kind of examine like the mediation of performance or something along those lines, if you want them to, animate historical images, things of that nature, this might be a good option for you. It's not something that a lot of people know about, and there's not a lot of documentation on how to create stuff. But if you're adventurous and you're ready and you're comfortable with students potentially failing at their attempts to do something, or taking iterative steps towards improving things and not getting it right away, this might be a good option for you. Adobe After Effects is motion graphics and visual effects software. It would take me the majority of the time that we have left to go through every feature that it has. It is something that you would use really only if you're doing animation work, right? If you're having them do something like kinetic typography, where they're animating images of text on screen as you hear the audio of it being said. If they're doing something where it involves animating something in 3D. This is a very complex program. You would have to scaffold this program. This requires you to teach students how to use it. If you throw them in the deep end on this program, they will revolt. I can tell you that right now. They will not be happy about being forced to use this program if they don't know how to use it, or if you're not giving them the proper support on how to use it. But for the projects where this might be a good option, and you can build it into the course, this is a really powerful program. It's used professionally for graphics work and for like adding text to video, things of that nature. Now we're getting into the weird ones, the ones that have really no like category. So Adobe Aero. Well, actually, before I get into Aero, let me move back a bit. Other video and production tools. There are some that I can think of, iMovie, Final Cut Pro, things of that nature, are not things that we would typically recommend because of the versatility of the ones we mentioned, especially Premiere Rush. There really isn't much that we would recommend beyond that. If you have a specific use case, like for example, if you wanted to create 360 video, or if you wanted to do something that involved, something that these programs can't do, we would want to talk to you and try to help you out to find a tool that could work, because these tools are so versatile that you should be capable of doing almost anything you can think of with these tools specifically. But we can always help with figuring that out. But yeah, let's go. So moving on to the ones that are not really categorizable just yet. So Adobe Aero is a augmented reality authoring program. So what that means is, if you've ever used games that involve geolocation, right? That involve you looking through a tablet or a phone, and it shows what's behind the phone, but also things on screen like animated characters, or it uses the geolocation to specify something in game. A great example of this would be Pokemon Go, right? Or if you've ever been in a museum where they've had tablets you can take, and it tells you what's happening as you're going through these different places, or they have little animations that play on the tablet to interact with the space you're in. That's all Adobe Aero, that kind of work. So if you wanted to do something where students create a presentation that involves people moving through a space, right? Or creating a presentation that involves like both a mediated screen and also the real world, a historical tour, for example. Like if you wanted to have them have photographs kind of be in space, on the screens as they're looking at a building, for example. That's something that could be done in Aero. Another one that I think is kind of cute is you could essentially create, like with the augmented experiences, you could create essentially like visualized science, right? So you can, and math, right? So equations, problems, diagrams, things like that. You can create kind of 3D, in space models that can be viewed either through the Aero app or through the Aero VR app. It's kind of a powerful tool. It's something that, again, not a lot of people know about, and but it is available. The other one I'm going to mention here is Adobe Express, which really kind of fits into the more of the print and the print and graphic design things, except there's one new thing in Adobe Express which kind of puts it here. So it's used to it's honestly like the whole point of Adobe Express is for social media. It's for creating posts that will go to specific social media sites. It's a little bit like Canva, if you're familiar with that. So creating infographics and posters and things like that. It's way easier to use than Photoshop or Illustrator. So if you're looking for a really like lightweight thing for for students to create that kind of work with, this is definitely the tool for that. But the thing that kind of moved it down here was the fact that they added their new generative AI tools into Adobe Express. And so if you've ever thought about having students use something like DALL-E or Midjourney, Adobe Express has that capability built into Adobe Express, but does not have nearly, I don't want to say all, but it doesn't have nearly the same ethical problems as DALL-E and Midjourney. If you're not familiar with generative images, the part of the issue is that the set of images that something is based off of is often copyrighted material. And so the outputs sometimes resemble copyrighted material to the point where like artists' signatures get kind of smudged in a corner of an AI image. And a lot of these people have not consented to their materials being used as training for these two models in particular, Midjourney and DALL-E. The difference here is that Adobe's generative AI image creation is based off Adobe stock. So these are all images that they have rights to already. These are all images that are licensed through Adobe or to Adobe. So that's the main difference here, and that's why I have a cautious kind of like, if you want students to play with generative AI to create images with, and to for if you want to examine like the ramifications of using generative AI, this is a lot less ethically dubious, I would say, than a lot of the other image generation AI tools. But that is going to be also coming to Photoshop eventually as well. I don't know when that date is. It's currently in beta, but unfortunately we can't use beta versions of the main Adobe programs. So really, if you want to use this generative AI called Firefly, it is in Adobe Express only. So other tools that we can kind of think of here, there are tools for creating, say, timelines, or if you wanted to find a tool that was specific for creating like quick animations like Powtoons or something like that. Again, that's something that talk to us and we can kind of talk through and help you find versions of that would be free and or that we may already have licensing for. So I have a few resources I'm going to share with you. I'm going to send, if you have not registered for the TTC on the TTC site for this session, I would recommend doing that so that I have your email address to send this to. This is a list of resources for you. It has the ITS Adobe page, which is something you should share with students for them to install the programs on there. The Adobe helpx.adobe.com is an essential tool to share with students for tutorials. They have the best tutorials for their software of anywhere I've seen. Also, Bluecore is a team that we have here in the MLB, where they can meet with students. They can do they can provide support to students going through these projects. They can help you kind of figure out how you want to teach the students these software, for example, doing workshops in class, things of that nature. You can also reach out to our group, the Learning and Teaching Consulting Group. And also edx.adobe.com is a bunch of like educational resources. So if you're looking for, say, a template for an assignment, this is a good spot to start to find stuff or find inspiration for different kind of projects that you can do. You can search by subject. You can search by age group. It's primarily, I would say the vast majority of stuff on there is K through 12, but there's a lot of good inspiration stuff that you can take and kind of adapt to for your course.